With a warning of escalating threats to Western security posed by countries like Russia, Iran and China, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has pledged to ramp up UK defence spending by tens of billions of pounds over the next 6 years, to lift it from 2.3% of GDP to 2.5%.
Whether we like it or not, the world is, I think, more dangerous than it's been at any moment since the Cold War. And it falls on leaders, whether that's Olaf, whether that's me, to do what's necessary to keep our countries and our continent safe and to stand up for our values.
While touring Europe, the PM has also committed £500 million for military aid for Ukraine. This came just before the US Congress finally agreed a huge Ukraine funding package. We reflected on this week's developments with the former Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon and Phillips, a Professor of Strategic Studies at St Andrews University. Hamish, is the boost to defence spending to 2.5% of our GDP what Britain needs?
Well, I think it's certainly a really good start and sends a very clear message that after really paying lip service to our conventional deterrence since the end of the Cold War, we're now serious about it. When Putin looks across at us and other European NATO countries, he is not deterred by our conventional offence. And the other key element is it sends a clear message to our European allies, NATO allies, that they must up their defence too. Because although war with Russia is not necessarily guaranteed, if things go really badly, Britain could be fighting Russia in Europe, and we must prepare. And the more we prepare, the less likely it's going to happen. So well overdue. I would like to see more spent, because that's what we need to replenish our stocks. But it's a step in the right direction.
And is that what the money would be spent on then, Hamish, replenishing the stocks of artillery?
Well, first of all, we need to get our ammo bunkers full. Quite rightly, we've given a lot of ammunition, artillery shells and precision-guided missiles to the Ukraine, because much better they hold the Russians in Ukraine than us having to get involved. But also, we need to look at the capabilities that are required to fight a war like this. And the Strategic Defence Review, which has given us the current military structure, I think is designed for a war that doesn't exist at the moment, and I don't see it existing in the future. So I agree, Labour has a good plan to have a strategic defence review, but we need more precision-guided munitions, we need more drones, and we need to think about mass, because mass is something, and that's what I mean by manpower and tanks, is not something we have. So we do need to look at our capability as a whole.
Phillips, so much public spending is squeezed at the moment. Is this the time to increase defence spending?
Well, in many ways, what we're seeing now is inevitable, and it could get worse in terms of the need to spend on defense. In 8 months, the United States might elect Donald Trump president. And this could be someone who has announced that he has no interest in NATO. He's even said that NATO countries could go to hell if they don't do what he wants. The UK could find itself in a situation where its entire strategic structure, which is based on cooperation with the United States, and Europe's strategic structure through NATO, is now no longer. And the United States is no longer willing to fight for NATO. In that case, 2.5% is actually going to be far less. So this is, a prudent step, but we don't know what the world is going to be like. It could be a much scarier world for Europe in only about 9 months' time.
Hamish, how serious are the threats to Western security?
I think the threats to Western security and the threats to the UK are probably the highest they've ever been since the end of the Second World War. And I say that including the Cold War. And I'm not so concerned. I'm very concerned what's happening in the Middle East, obviously, but I don't think that is going to draw us in. But what is happening in Ukraine? Putin has been telling us for years that he's going to retake those old Soviet countries, and he is going to march westwards. And we've sort of ignored it and let things sort of go on. So I think that is a threat that is so real and so of its time that we need to stand up. And tyrants like Putin only recognize strength. They exploit weakness. And for too long, we have been shown weakness. And Putin doesn't think that we're going to pile in to save Ukraine. But if Putin does prevail in Ukraine and the first Russian boot that goes west of Ukraine. It's on NATO soil, and we will then be all in. And I prefer that actually we're a bit more proactive and, actually help the Ukrainians much more, as we did the Israelis shooting down all those Iranian drones and missiles. I can't see legally or any other reasons why we shouldn't be doing that for the missiles and drones fired from Crimea. So yeah, the threat is very real, and we need to damp it down as much as possible, and we do that by having a strong defence.
Phillips, do you think there is a possibility of the UK going to war with Russia?
Well, going to war, I mean, in Ukraine, there doesn't have to be a question if Ukraine has helped right now and helped a great deal. I mean, we've been given a bit of a breathing space because the U.S. Congress has approved aid for Ukraine. But again, if the U.S. Congress hadn't approved aid for Ukraine and Ukraine was left on its own with just European support, 2.5% wouldn't be enough. Right now, there would have to be far more spent because Europe would have to step in and try and replace the United States in Ukraine. So, and in many ways, as was said before, it's far better to to allow Ukraine to do Europe's job for it now, but that means Europe has the obligation to help it. I mean, Ukraine is doing a huge strategic service to Europe from keeping most of Europe at peace by tying down the Russian army. And that actually is probably where the money should go right now.
Phillips mentions that this money that the US is giving to Ukraine, it's $61 billion, and the UK is going to give $500 million to Ukraine. So what difference will that make? Could this lead to a pivotal moment, do you think, Hamish?
I think, first of all, Philip's absolutely right. Without that $61 billion from the US, Ukraine would be in real dire straits. And I don't think that the UK and other NATO countries in Europe could backfill that. So it's absolutely critical. I think what is also critical, the $500 million the UK is giving includes some key military capability like the Storm Shadow missile. Now that is changing the game, and that could be a pivotal time. And so this summer is going to be key. The Russians have really pushing hard on the Ukrainian front lines. They're making some breakthroughs. They're using an awful lot of CS gas as a chemical weapon, which is being as effective on the front lines today as it was on the front lines of the First World War, and we need to mitigate against that. But also we have the F-16 jets about to come over the horizon. So with everything else that is building at the moment and the positivity coming out of the UK and the US, hopefully that will be enough for the Ukrainians to hold and start pushing the Russians back this summer, because if it's not, we're going to be all in, I think.
Phillips, is that how you see it, that the summer could be crucial?
Well, the key thing now is what UK aid is going to do two things. This is going to be a really terrible summer. I don't think actually there's going to be a Russian breakthrough because the US aid is going to get there. But what is not going to happen is Ukraine is not going to be able to take the initiative. Ukraine is going to be on the defensive for most of 2024 as Russia is going to try and do these attacks. So if Ukraine is actually going to try and improve its situation greatly, it's going to have to prepare for 2025. And that actually is a role that the UK is doing. One of the key things the UK is doing is helping the Ukrainians, by the way, with their air power, the development of sort of advanced UAV technology. So the UK is playing a very important role, one, in helping stabilize now through things like Storm Shadows, but also preparing Ukraine for the future.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both very much indeed for joining us this evening.